Hello everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia and today it is time for Friday Reads. I feel like I was just here 5 seconds ago, but that was a different video and it is Friday, so I want to talk about what I've been reading this week, which are mostly totally different things than I talked about in that short story video because I'm kind of keeping them separate, except for the one book that I went ahead and read the whole book, so it made it to Friday Reads. So I hope you've had a good week. It has been fine around here, still blazing hot like the surface of the sun, but I think there's supposed to be a cold front coming where it's only going to be in the low 90s next weekend, so woohoo! Let's talk about TV shows for a second. Let's see. Oh, I do have one thing different to report. So still watching Only Murders in the Building, Reservation Dogs. Oh, that most recent episode about with Rita and Cookie. Oh, I'm not gonna say anything because maybe you haven't seen it yet. And then How To with John Wilson, which is just kind of weird and fascinating. And then we've been watching this week this show. Let's see, it's on Apple TV called Drops of God, and it is from a manga. But it's live action and it's in French, English, and Japanese. So we just put the English subtitles on for when the characters kind of slip back and forth through, because there's a bunch of French people in it, but there's Japanese people, and some of it takes place in France and some of it takes place in Japan. And then every now and then they just decide to all speak English to each other. The premise is that this famous, eccentric, super rich wine expert with this incredibly valuable wine collection has passed away, and he sets up a contest between his estranged daughter and his protege for his estate, and they have to do this contest where they try to identify three rare wines. So it gets into the backstory eventually about this guy, and the two competitors are like in their late 20s, a Japanese man and a French woman, and then we get through their stories and their struggles. And anyway, so for a while we weren't sure because it seemed a little corny. Like you think, well, why doesn't he just why go to all this complication? Why don't you just give your daughter something and give this other guy something or whatever? Why does it have to be this whole thing? But if you kind of just set that aside and go with it, the story is pretty interesting. And somehow they managed to go on and on and on and on about wine without it getting boring. So I don't know. So we're still watching it. We keep, for a couple of episodes, we're like, are we into this? And I guess we are because we're still watching it. So that's Drops of God. Never mind about all that. Let's talk about the books. So everything this week was either shortish, or a short story. And the first thing that I finished was a reread of Foster by Claire Keegan. This is such a beautiful little novel, and I guess officially I'm not supposed to talk about it because it's in the BookTube finals, but I've talked about it multiple times on this channel, so I won't go back over it. And you know, it was shortlisted last year for the Booker Prize, and it was the one of the 6 books for the BookTube finals that I had read the furthest away back in the past. So I wanted to refresh my memory before I decided my rankings, which I did. I refreshed my memory and I thought over the 6 books, and I did it. I went in and I entered my rankings, and I will be filming a video to talk about all that. So I guess I won't really go back over this book again right now, just in the spirit of the contest. Then I read, what is all this notification? I don't remember what I marked in here. This is Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated by Julia Sanchez. It was written in Catalan, and it's been translated to English. And this book, a lot of people were talking about this, I don't know, a few months ago, I guess because it was shortlisted for the International Booker. And I don't know if it was on another list. But and then some people were reading it for women in translation as well. Somehow I just missed all of that, but now I have read it and I really enjoyed it. This was an interesting book. Um, so Boulder is a nickname given to our main character, whose actual name we never do hear, and this name was given to her by her girlfriend Samsa. Boulder is a woman who she works. Her job is a cook, and she at first has worked in various restaurants, but she keeps losing those jobs. And one employer tells her, you know, it's not your cooking, it's just you. Like he says, you need to get a job where you work all by yourself. She doesn't really have those people skills. She really is a serious introvert, and she's blunt and she's kind of uncompromising, but she's not unlikable even with all these aspects. And she eventually gets a job. I mean, unlikable to us as a reader. She gets a job on a cargo ship, a freighter kind of ship, as the cook, where she can just be all, you know, just her in the kitchen and be in charge. And she really loves this job. She's a person that doesn't want to be encumbered with a lot of things. She doesn't want property and too much um, too much infrastructure in her life. And so she describes, she basically takes this job at first for free. And she's talking about here when she starts the job, and she says, he offered me the job because I didn't ask for money, just room and board. I think I've discovered what happiness is. Whistling the moment you wake up, not getting in anyone's way, owing no explanations, and falling into bed at daybreak, body addled from exhaustion and mind free of every last trace of bitterness and dust. And she goes on to say it's like her best job she's ever had. And this is going along just fine until she meets Samsa. So, because the one thing that's missing in this lifestyle on the ship is the companionship of a lover, because she is on this ship. It's basically a bunch of men and her and the occasional passengers, and Samsa is a lesbian, so there's nobody there for her. And so every now and then she meets someone when they go on these little layovers where the ship might stay somewhere for a day or two. And during one of these trips, she meets Samsa and they fall in love. And so for a while, this also is working out great, because when the ship's going to be somewhere where Samsa can come meet up, and they have these little short get-togethers, and it's kind of like a summer vacation vibes where everything's working really good because you're outside of each of your usual structures. But Samsa gets a job in Iceland, and Boulder decides to go with her. So she leaves her ship job and she goes to live with Samsa. And this is where things kind of take the turn, but they really take a turn when Samsa decides that she wants to have a child. Samsa is more conventional in her wants and needs than Boulder is. She has a very solid job. She's working her way up in that job. She wants a house. She wants a child. And Boulder really hasn't changed, except for being in love with Samsa. She has not changed from her desire to keep things as unencumbered as possible. She doesn't even want to move into the house that Samsa buys. She wants to just stay in the small apartment with as few belongings as possible. They reach an impasse where basically Boulder feels that she either has to agree to have this child or the relationship is over. So now I don't want to give anything else away that happens, but this is a kind of about her experience watching her partner change, and not just the physical changes, but just the change in mindset and priorities of becoming a parent, and Boulder really not being a willing participant, but feeling that she has to try to get with it and do this with her. And there's just a lot of really beautifully written and beautifully frank descriptions of this time in her life, and what it is like to feel isolated, and like they're basically on two different icebergs going in different directions because of this transformation into motherhood. I'm not sure how Samsa is not aware or can't acknowledge this fundamental fact about her partner. Um, but there it is. And as I was reading this, I thought there could be two books. There could be a whole other book going through all of these exact same things called Samsa. And what is this like from her point of view? And because she seems to be, I don't know. When you hear it from Boulder's point of view, Samsa doesn't seem to um, acknowledge Boulder's fundamental needs and personalities very often in this story. Um, but Boulder feels the need to try to accommodate and adjust to Samsa. So I don't know. It would be interesting to hear the other side of the story, but that was Boulder. It was very very thought provoking. I enjoyed it a lot. The next book was a little runaway side trail from my 30 stories in 30 days, and that was the fact that I had to go ahead and read all the rest of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. This is my copy that infamously I thought when I saw it online had a bagel on the cover, but it is a peach. And upon reading it, I found out the significance of the peach, and I'm not the peach as a symbol, you know, it's emoji type symbol, but there is a story called Peach Cobbler in this story, which is yeah. And actually the I think that the character from Peach Cobbler reappears in another story. It's just a little kind of blink and you miss it thing that identifies somebody. But anyway, I'm getting off the track already. But The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. And I've been hearing about this book for a year or two on multiple channels, mostly from Greg at Supposedly Fun, who manages to bring it up into every other video. And so finally, I did get my copy, and I was saving it for September, for Shorty September. And I read the first story. I talk about it in my video about the first 6 stories, and then I just kept reading it. I kept going back in between other things I was reading and reading. Oh, just another story and another story. And before you knew it, I had read the whole book, and I really love this book. So these are not linked stories. They are separate stories, but somehow the entire collection is solid and so good. I have, obviously I love short stories, but I find that if it's not a collection of intentionally linked stories, sometimes it's just so uneven, and there's a few gems and then some that seem like ideas in the works that didn't quite make it up to being a really good story. And so I've become a little wary of short story collections that don't have some kind of, central storyline. And this one, there are certain themes that reappear and are worked in different ways in these stories, but they are separate stories. They are all about Black women at different points in their lives, and the church lady theme is there. Sometimes the woman herself is having a crisis about between her upbringing and where she finds herself as an adult. Sometimes the main character is a teenager. A lot of conflicts with mothers and generational issues, but and there's a wonderful diversity within the group, but their ages, their conflicts. Some are queer, some are straight, but it's all about the women. All the emotions are there. They're at different points. The stories are funny, sad, anger provoking, startling, surprising, sexy, hopeful, warm. I mean, just like everything. And it's not like, ooh, a feel-good story with optimistic ending. I don't mean it like that, but there is this optimism in the stories. You manage to see growth and movement of not just the plot, but the characters. And I think that's really hard, to actually have character growth and development within the space of a short story. Sometimes stories are just almost like a gimmick where they just want to throw in one little splash of something, but these are fuller and more satisfying. So I don't want to say too much about them, but they're so great. I mean, just some of the titles. How to Make Love to a Physicist. That story, there was a couple of times in that story where I was just like, what? No, no, what are you doing? It's just so good. And Instructions for Married Christian Husbands, which has one of the greatest opening lines of a short story, which is, you, the infantilized husbands of accomplished godly women, are especially low-hanging fruit. If you want to find out more about the instructions, you will. Oh, and then this other one, the beginning of Peach Cobbler. My mother's peach cobbler was so good it made God himself cheat on his wife. You have to read these if you want to know more after hearing those first sentences. But this was definitely the, well, I can't say it was like the find of the week because I knew it was going to be that good. I've known it for months and I've just been waiting, and then, but it didn't let me down. Like the buildup didn't end up in a deflation. It really was very good. All right, so that brings me to the last thing I read over the past day or so, which I got to that point where I was looking at all my books and I thought, oh, I need one of those palate cleansers. I need something fun and fast-paced and maybe a thriller or just something. And so at the library, I picked up Prom Mom by Laura Lippman. Now, I have read a lot of Laura Lippman's books. If you're not familiar with Laura Lippman, she was a former journalist turned novelist. She was previously married to the TV producer David Simon for many years, but they are now divorced. And she has been writing, her books are always categorized in detectives and thrillers, but they don't always necessarily fit completely into that box. You can get a pretty kind of an interesting range of things from Lippman. Sometimes they are just straight up like a murder mystery. Sometimes there's a historical aspect. Sometimes they have a noir kind of structure, and there's a little touch of that in this novel. Sometimes you read for a really long time and don't know what exactly is the mystery, which also happens in this book. It might be a straightforward mystery. It might be a eventual revelation. It might be a long con. It might be a revenge tale. You don't really know where you're going necessarily until you get closer to it. And so I've always really enjoyed her. They're fast, they're fun, they're not going to appear on the Booker Prize list, but they are generally satisfying reads. So in this particular book, it has this kind of lurid title, and it does refer to a case that hit the tabloids. Well, it's happened in real life, but in the fiction, there was a girl named Amber Glass who, when she went to her prom, she allegedly gave birth to a child that she did not know she was pregnant with in a hotel bathroom, and then she either killed it or abandoned it to die. And so she was dubbed the prom mom, and the boy that she had been seeing that she went to the prom with was called the Cad Dad. And so we have flashbacks to the late 90s when this incident occurred to kind of explain what was going on with Amber. Did she know that she was pregnant? She claims that she doesn't remember any of this. She just woke up laying in blood and just freaked out and left. So trigger warnings about that situation because it's kind of grisly. And then the boy claims, nobody even knew they were dating. They apparently had gone to the prom as friends, and he said he didn't know anything about this either. He said she got sick at the prom and went up to this room that they had booked, and then he didn't know any of this was going on. So years later, it's 20 years later, they are around the age of 40, And Amber did spend a couple of years in a juvenile facility for this crime, and Joe had no repercussions. He just took a gap year and then he went on with his business. And so she has come back to town because she has inherited some money from the passing of her stepfather. She's been out of Baltimore for all these years, but she comes back, and she just comes back to settle his estate, but she decides to stick around and open a gallery because she is an art dealer. And we also find out that Joe also is back in Baltimore, has been living there with his wife, who's a plastic surgeon, and he is a real estate developer. And so we start to find out a little bit about each of them, and we are sort of watching as they get closer to their paths crossing. What that means or what might happen next, you have to read to find out. But as the story unfolds, we find out that Joe is one of these type of people who have gone through life kind of aided and abetted by people around him, and particularly women in this story, and just kind of oblivious, privileged, entitled. He's not at first overtly horrendous or unappealing, but as you start to learn more about his personality and his attitudes, you realize that he has just been moving in life like wrapped in bubble wrap with no consequences for his decisions. And something about Lippman is that she does not hesitate to make a book where nobody is particularly appealing, where every character is problematic, and you really, you're not reading it because you're rooting for someone. You're reading it to see how these odd people and the choices they make, what is going to happen, what is intentional, what is subconscious, where is this going, does anybody have a plan, or are they just bumbling through? And although in this book, as in most of her books, there's a strong feminist streak, and there's a lot of accountability that Joe has dodged, but she doesn't let up on the women either, because Joe has gone through life cushioned and shielded by a number of women who make his life easier and give him a pass on a lot of things. And so she's kind of calling them into account as well, I think, in this book. But it also qualifies as a pandemic read, and looking at you, Sonia, with your interest in books that are in covering the COVID-19, because the story begins in the modern day part of the story begins in 2019. That's when Amber moves back to town and opens her business, and Joe's trying to score a big real estate deal. And then, the calendar turns around and things become more complicated in the spring of 2020. And so this is yet another story that kind of touches on, well, here's what people's plans were, and here's how they functioned in their homes or in their lives, and then this happened, and what did it do to everybody? How did it impact them professionally, financially, personally, in their relationships? So that is a part of the elements too. So all of that was great. It got a little haywire right at the end. Some stuff happened that kind of stretched the limits of plausibility, or unanswered questions about, well, wait a minute, how did that couple of, oh, now you're going to tell me that thing here at the last minute? So there was a little bit of that little blah stuff right at the end where you're like, oh, a little too much. But it was fun. It was enjoyable, and I have no regrets. So if you like this author, or you just like to read a thriller, or not, it's not really even a thriller, but there is some suspense. But if you just like to read something that is smart but not too taxing in between some of your other reads, I do recommend Laura Lippman. And this book was, I had fun reading it. Prom, Mom. Silly title, but it makes sense in the context of the story, and the concept of her being identified by this moniker for life every time anybody ever Googles her, while Joe's association with all that has just kind of faded into oblivion. So that is what I read. I once again have hit the end of the week. I finished Prom Mom last night, so I am wide open on what I'm going to choose for my next novel. And I'm continuing the short stories, of course. I am reading, I'm going to read a little bit more in the George Saunders collection, along with whatever are the stories of the day. And I'm going to pick up a novel today, but I haven't decided which one, so we'll just see. I don't even have like a short list. I just have a bunch of stuff on my cart and I need to see how I feel. I think I'll pick one of my other shorties. So wait and see. I hope that you have had a wonderful week and that your weekend is good as well. I think we're going to go to a home and garden show this afternoon just for fun. See what's in there. We don't need anything. You're looking for something air conditioned to go and do. So let me know what you've been reading, what's going on, and I will be back on Tuesday with another video. Thank you. Bye-bye.